Book number 8, The Counterblow. Chapter 3, Javert Satisfied. This is what had taken place. The half-hour after midnight had just struck, when Monsieur Madeleine quitted the Hall of Assizes in Arras. He regained his inn just in time to set out again by the mail wagon, in which he had engaged his place. A little before 6 o'clock in the morning, he had arrived at Montreuil-sur-Mer, and his first care had been to post a letter to Monsieur Laffitte, then to enter the infirmary and see Fantine. However, he had hardly quitted the audience hall of the Court of Assizes, when the district attorney, recovering from his first shock, had taken the word to deplore the mad deed of the honourable Mayor of Montreuil-sur-Mer, to declare that his convictions had not been in the least modified by that curious incident, which would be explained thereafter, and to demand, in the meantime, the condemnation of that Champmathieu, who was evidently the real Jean Valjean. The district attorney's persistence was visibly at variance with the sentiments of everyone, of the public, of the court, and of the jury. The counsel for the defence had some difficulty in refuting this harangue, and in establishing that, in consequence of the revelations of Monsieur Madeleine, that is to say, of the real Jean Valjean, the aspect of the matter had been thoroughly altered, and that the jury had before their eyes now only an innocent man. Thence the lawyer had drawn up some epiphanias, not very fresh, unfortunately, upon judicial errors, etc., etc. The president, in his summing up, had joined the counsel for the defence, and in a few minutes the jury had thrown Champmathieu out of the case. Nevertheless, the district attorney was bent on having a Jean Valjean, and as he had no longer Champmathieu, he took Madeleine. Immediately after Champmathieu had been set at liberty, the district attorney shut himself up with the president. They conferred as to the necessity of seizing the person of Monsieur le Maire of Montreuil-sur-Mer. This phrase, in which there was a great deal of, is the district attorney's, written with his own hand, on the minutes of his report to the Attorney General. His first emotion having passed off, the president did not offer many objections. Justice must, after all, take its course. And then, when all was said, although the president was a kindly and a tolerably intelligent man, he was, at the same time, a devoted and almost an ardent royalist, and he had been shocked to hear the mayor of Montreuil-sur-Mer say the emperor, and not Bonaparte, when alluding to the landing at Cannes. The order for his arrest was accordingly dispatched. The district attorney forwarded it to Montreuil-sur-Mer by a special messenger, at full speed, and entrusted its execution to Police Inspector Javert. The reader knows that Javert had returned to Montreuil-sur-Mer immediately after having given his deposition. Javert was just getting out of bed when the messenger handed him the order of arrest and the command to produce the prisoner. The messenger himself was a very clever member of the police, who in 2 words informed Javert of what had taken place at Arras. The order of arrest, signed by the district attorney, was couched in these words: Inspector Javert will apprehend the body of the Sieur Madeleine, Mayor of Montreuil-sur-Mer, who, in this day's session of the court, was recognized as the liberated convict Jean Valjean. Anyone who did not know Javert, and who had chanced to see him at the moment when he penetrated the antechamber of the infirmary, could have divined nothing of what had taken place, and would have thought his air the most ordinary in the world. He was cool, calm, grave, his grey hair was perfectly smoothed upon his temples, and he had just mounted the stairs with his habitual deliberation. Anyone who was thoroughly acquainted with him, and who had examined him attentively at the moment, would have shuddered. The buckle of his leather stock was under his left ear instead of at the nape of his neck. This betrayed unwonted agitation. Javert was a complete character, who never had a wrinkle in his duty or in his uniform, methodical with malefactors, rigid with the buttons of his coat. that he should have set the buckle of his stock awry. It was indispensable that there should have taken place in him one of those emotions which may be designated as internal earthquakes. He had come in a simple way, had made a requisition on the neighbouring post for a corporal and 4 soldiers, had left the soldiers in the courtyard, had had Fantine's room pointed out to him by the portress, who was utterly unsuspicious, accustomed as she was to seeing armed men inquiring for the mayor. On arriving at Fantine's chamber, Javert turned the handle, pushed the door open with the gentleness of a sick nurse or a police spy, and entered. Properly speaking, he did not enter. He stood erect in the half-open door, his hat on his head and his left hand thrust into his coat, which was buttoned up to the chin. In the bend of his elbow, the leaden hand of his enormous cane, which was hidden behind him, could be seen. Thus he remained for nearly a minute, without his presence being perceived. All at once Fantine raised her eyes, saw him, and made Monsieur Madeleine turn around. The instant that Madeleine's glance encountered Javert's glance, Javert, without stirring, without moving from his post, without approaching him, became terrible. No human sentiment can be as terrible as joy. It was the visage of a demon who had just found his damned soul. The satisfaction of at last getting hold of Jean Valjean caused all that was in his soul to appear in his countenance. The depths having been stirred up mounted to the surface. The humiliation of having in some slight degree lost the scent, and of having indulged for a few moments in an error with regard to Champmathieu, was effaced by pride at having so well and accurately divined in the first place, and of having for so long cherished a just instinct. Javert's content shone forth in his sovereign attitude. The deformity of triumph overspread that narrow brow. All the demonstrations of horror which a satisfied face can afford were there. Javert was in heaven at that moment. Without putting the thing clearly to himself, but with a confused intuition of the necessity of his presence and of his success, he, Javert, personified justice, light, and truth in their celestial function of crushing out evil. Behind him and around him, at an infinite distance, he had authority, reason, the case judged, the legal conscience, the public prosecution, all the stars. He was protecting order, he was causing the law to yield up its thunders. He was avenging society, he was lending a helping hand to the absolute. He was standing erect in the midst of a glory. There existed in his victory a remnant of defiance and of combat. Erect, haughty, brilliant, he flaunted abroad in open day the superhuman bestiality of a ferocious archangel. The terrible shadow of the action which he was accomplishing caused the vague flash of the social sword to be visible in his clenched fist. Happy and indignant, he held his heel upon crime, vice, rebellion, perdition, hell. He was radiant. He exterminated. He smiled, and there was an incontestable grandeur in this monstrous Saint Michael. Javert, though frightful, had nothing ignoble about him. Probity, sincerity, candour, conviction, the sense of duty, are things which may become hideous when wrongly directed, but which, even when hideous, remain grand. Their majesty, the majesty peculiar to the human conscience, clings to them in the midst of horror. They are virtues which have one vice, error. The honest, pitiless joy of a fanatic in the full flood of his atrocity preserves a certain lugubriously venerable radiance. Without himself suspecting the fact, Javert in his formidable happiness was to be pitied, as is every ignorant man who triumphs. Nothing could be so poignant and so terrible as this face, wherein was displayed all that may be designated as the evil of the good. End of book number 8, chapter 3, recording by Graham Jolliffe, Kyogle, Australia.
Fantine had not seen Javert since the day on which the mare had torn her from the man. Her ailing brain comprehended nothing, but the only thing which she did not doubt was that he had come to get her. She could not endure that terrible face. She felt her life quitting her. She hid her face in both hands and shrieked in her anguish. "Monsieur Madeleine, save me!" Jean Valjean, we shall henceforth not speak of him otherwise, had risen. He said to Fantine in the gentlest and calmest of voices, "Be at ease. It is not for you that he is come." Then he addressed Javert and said, "I know what you want." Javert replied, "Be quick about it." There lay in the inflection of voice which accompanied these words something indescribably fierce and frenzied. Javert did not say, "Be quick about it." He said, "Be quick about it." No orthography can do justice to the accent with which it was uttered. It was no longer a human word, it was a roar. He did not proceed according to his custom. He did not enter into the matter. He exhibited no warrant of arrest. In his eyes, Jean Valjean was a sort of mysterious combatant, who was not to be laid hands upon, a wrestler in the dark whom he had had in his grasp for the last 5 years, without being able to throw him. This arrest was not a beginning, but an end. He confined himself to saying, "Be quick about it." As he spoke thus, he did not advance a single step. He hurled at Jean Valjean a glance which he threw out like a grappling hook, and with which he was accustomed to draw wretches violently to him. It was this glance which Fantine had felt penetrating to the very marrow of her bones 2 months previously. At Javert's exclamation, Fantine opened her eyes once more, but the mare was there. What had she to fear? Javert advanced to the middle of the room and cried, "See here now, art thou coming?" The unhappy woman glanced about her. No one was present excepting the nun and the mare. To whom could that abject use of thou be addressed? To her only. She shuddered. Then she beheld a most unprecedented thing, a thing so unprecedented that nothing equal to it had appeared to her even in the blackest deliriums of fever. She beheld Javert, the police spy, seize the mare by the collar. She saw the mare bow his head. It seemed to her that the world was coming to an end. Javert had, in fact, grasped Jean Valjean by the collar. "Monsieur le Maire!" shrieked Fantine. Javert burst out laughing with that frightful laugh which displayed all his gums. "There is no longer any Monsieur le Maire here." Jean Valjean made no attempt to disengage the hand which grasped the collar of his coat. He said, "Javert." Javert interrupted him. "Call me Mr. Inspector." "Monsieur," said Jean Valjean, "I should like to say a word to you in private." "Aloud! Say it aloud!" replied Javert. "People are in the habit of talking aloud to me." Jean Valjean went on in a lower tone. "I have a request to make of you. I tell you to speak loud, but you alone should hear it." "What difference does that make to me? I shall not listen." Jean Valjean turned towards him and said very rapidly and in a very low voice, "Grant me 3 days' grace, 3 days in which to go and fetch the child of this unhappy woman. I will pay whatever is necessary. You shall accompany me if you choose." "You are making sport of me," cried Javert. "Come now, I did not think you such a fool. You ask me to give you 3 days in which to run away. You say that it is for the purpose of fetching that creature's child. Ah, that's good. That's really capital." Fantine was seized with a fit of trembling. "My child!" she cried. "Go and fetch my child. She is not here, then. Answer me, sister, where is Cosette? I want my child. Monsieur Madeleine, Monsieur le Maire!" Javert stamped his foot. "And now there's the other one. Will you hold your tongue, you hussy? It's a pretty sort of place where convicts are magistrates, and where women of the town are cared for like countesses. Ah, but we are going to change all that. It is high time." He stared intently at Fantine and added, once more taking into his grasp Jean Valjean's cravat, shirt, and collar, "I tell you that there is no Monsieur Madeleine, and that there is no Monsieur le Maire. There is a thief, a brigand, a convict named Jean Valjean, and I have him in my grasp. That's what there is." Fantine raised herself in her bed with a bound, supporting herself on her stiffened arms and on both hands. She gazed at Jean Valjean, she gazed at Javert, she gazed at the nun, she opened her mouth as though to speak. A rattle proceeded from the depths of her throat, her teeth chattered. She stretched out her arms in her agony, opening her hands convulsively and fumbling about her like a drowning person, then suddenly fell back on her pillow. Her head struck the headboard of the bed, and fell forwards on her breast, with gaping mouth and staring sightless eyes. She was dead. Jean Valjean laid his hand upon the detaining hand of Javert, and opened it, as he would have opened the hand of a baby, and then he said to Javert, "You have murdered that woman." "Let's have an end of this," shouted Javert in a fury. "I am not here to listen to argument. Let us economize all that. The guard is below. March on instantly, or you'll get the thumbscrews." In the corner of the room stood an old iron bedstead, which was in a decidedly decrepit state, and which served the sisters as a camp bed when they were watching with the sick. Jean Valjean stepped up to this bed, in a twinkling wrenched off the headpiece, which was already in a dilapidated condition, an easy matter to muscles like his, grasped the principal rod like a bludgeon, and glanced at Javert. Javert retreated towards the door. Jean Valjean, armed with his bar of iron, walked slowly up to Fantine's couch. When he arrived there, he turned and said to Javert, in a voice that was barely audible, "I advise you not to disturb me at this moment. One thing is certain, and that is, that Javert trembled." It did occur to him to summon the guard, but Jean Valjean might avail himself of that moment to effect his escape. So he remained, grasped his cane by the small end, and leaned against the door-post, without removing his eyes from Jean Valjean. Jean Valjean rested his elbow on the knob at the head of the bed, and his brow on his hand, and began to contemplate the motionless body of Fantine, which lay extended there. He remained thus, mute, absorbed, evidently with no further thought of anything connected with this life. Upon his face and in his attitude there was nothing but inexpressible pity. After a few moments of this meditation, he bent towards Fantine and spoke to her in a low voice. What did he say to her? What could this man who was reproved say to that woman who was dead? What words were those? No one on earth heard them. Did the dead woman hear them? There are some touching illusions which are perhaps sublime realities. The point as to which there exists no doubt is, that Sister Simplice, the sole witness of the incident, often said that at the moment that Jean Valjean whispered in Fantine's ear, she distinctly beheld an ineffable smile dawn on those pale lips, and in those dim eyes, filled with the amazement of the tomb. Jean Valjean took Fantine's head in both his hands and arranged it on the pillow, as a mother might have done for her child. Then he tied the string of her chemise, and smoothed her hair back under her cap. That done, he closed her eyes. Fantine's face seemed strangely illuminated at that moment. Death, that signifies entrance into the great light. Fantine's hand was hanging over the side of the bed. Jean Valjean knelt down before that hand, lifted it gently, and kissed it. Then he rose and turned to Javert. "Now," said he, "I am at your disposal." End of Book 8, Chapter 4. Recording by Graham Jolliffe, Kyogle, Australia.
Javert deposited Jean Valjean in the city prison. The arrest of Monsieur Madeleine occasioned a sensation, or rather, an extraordinary commotion in M. We are sorry that we cannot conceal the fact that at the single word, "he was a convict," nearly everyone deserted him. In less than 2 hours all the good that he had done had been forgotten, and he was nothing but a convict from the galleys. It is just to add that the details of what had taken place at Arras were not yet known. All day long conversations like the following were to be heard in all the quarters of the town. "You don't know? He was a liberated convict." "Who?" "The mayor." "Bah! Monsieur Madeleine?" "Yes, really. His name was not Madeleine at all. He had a frightful name, Beaujean, Bougin. Ah, good God! He has been arrested. Arrested! In prison, in the city prison, while waiting to be transferred. Until he is transferred? He is to be transferred. Where is he to be taken? He will be tried at the assizes for a highway robbery which he committed long ago. Well, I suspected as much. That man was too good, too perfect, too affected. He refused the cross. He bestowed sous on all the little scamps he came across. I always thought there was some evil history back of all that." The drawing-rooms particularly abounded in remarks of this nature. One old lady, a subscriber to the Drapeau Blanc, made the following remark, the depth of which it is impossible to fathom. "I am not sorry. It will be a lesson to the Bonapartists." It was thus that the phantom which had been called Monsieur Madeleine vanished from Montreuil-sur-Mer. Only 3 or 4 persons in all the town remained faithful to his memory. The old portress who had served him was among the number. On the evening of that day, the worthy old woman was sitting in her lodge, still in a thorough fright, and absorbed in sad reflections. The factory had been closed all day, the carriage gate was bolted, the street was deserted. There was no one in the house but the 2 nuns, Sister Perpétue and Sister Simplice, who were watching beside the body of Fantine. Towards the hour when Monsieur Madeleine was accustomed to return home, the good portress rose mechanically, took from a drawer the key of Monsieur Madeleine's chamber, and the flat candlestick which he used every evening to go up to his quarters. Then she hung the key on the nail whence he was accustomed to take it, and set the candlestick on one side, as though she was expecting him. Then she sat down again on her chair, and became absorbed in thought once more. The poor good old woman had done all this without being conscious of it. It was only at the expiration of 2 hours that she roused herself from her reverie, and exclaimed, "Hold, my good Jesus! And I hung his key on the nail!" At that moment the small window in the lodge opened. A hand passed through, seized the key and the candlestick, and lighted the taper at the candle which was burning there. The portress raised her eyes, and stood there with gaping mouth, and a shriek which she confined to her throat. She knew that hand, that arm, the sleeve of that coat. It was Monsieur Madeleine. It was several seconds before she could speak. She had a seizure, as she said herself, when she related the adventure afterwards. "Good God, Monsieur le Maire!" she cried at last. "I thought you were—" She stopped. The conclusion of her sentence would have been lacking in respect towards the beginning. Jean Valjean was still Monsieur le Maire to her. He finished her thought. "In prison," said he. "I was there. I broke a bar of one of the windows. I let myself drop from the top of a roof, and here I am. I am going up to my room. Go and find Sister Simplice for me. She is with that poor woman, no doubt." The old woman obeyed in all haste. He gave her no orders. He was quite sure that she would guard him better than he should guard himself. No one ever found out how he had managed to get into the courtyard without opening the big gates. He had, and always carried about him, a pass-key which opened a little side door, but he must have been searched, and his latch-key must have been taken from him. This point was never explained. He ascended the staircase leading to his chamber. On arriving at the top, he left his candle on the top step of his stairs, opened his door with very little noise, went and closed his window and his shutters by feeling, then returned for his candle and re-entered his room. It was a useful precaution. It will be recollected that his window could be seen from the street. He cast a glance about him, at his table, at his chair, at his bed which had not been disturbed for 3 days. No trace of the disorder of the night before last remained. The portress had done up his room. only she had picked out of the ashes and placed neatly on the table the 2 iron ends of the cudgel and the 40-sou piece which had been blackened by the fire. He took a sheet of paper, on which he wrote, "These are the 2 tips of my iron-shod cudgel and the 40-sou piece stolen from little Gervais, which I mentioned at the Court of Assizes." And he arranged this piece of paper, the bits of iron, and the coin in such a way that they were the first things to be seen on entering the room. From a cupboard he pulled out one of his old shirts, which he tore in pieces. In the strips of linen thus prepared he wrapped the 2 silver candlesticks. He betrayed neither haste nor agitation, and while he was wrapping up the bishop's candlesticks, he nibbled at a piece of black bread. It was probably the prison bread which he had carried with him in his flight. This was proved by the crumbs which were found on the floor of the room when the authorities made an examination later on. There came 2 taps at the door. "Come in," said he. It was Sister Simplice. She was pale, her eyes were red. The candle which she carried trembled in her hand. The peculiar feature of the violence of destiny is, that however polished or cool we may be, they wring human nature from our very bowels, and force it to reappear on the surface. The emotions of that day had turned the nun into a woman once more. She had wept, and she was trembling. Jean Valjean had just finished writing a few lines on a paper, which he handed to the nun, saying, "Sister, you will give this to Monsieur le Curé." The paper was not folded. She cast a glance upon it. "You can read it," said he. She read, "I beg Monsieur le Curé to keep an eye on all that I leave behind me. He will be so good as to pay out of it the expenses of my trial, and of the funeral of the woman who died yesterday. The rest is for the poor." The sister tried to speak, but she only managed to stammer a few inarticulate sounds. She succeeded in saying, however, "Does not Monsieur le Maire desire to take a last look at that poor, unhappy woman?" "No," said he. "I am pursued. It would only end in their arresting me in that room, and that would disturb her." He had hardly finished when a loud noise became audible on the staircase. They heard a tumult of ascending footsteps, and the old portress saying in her loudest and most piercing tones, "My good sir, I swear to you by the good God that not a soul has entered this house all day, nor all the evening, and that I have not even left the door." A man responded, "But there is light in that room, nevertheless." They recognized Javert's voice. The chamber was so arranged that the door in opening masked the corner of the wall on the right. Jean Valjean blew out the light and placed himself in this angle. Sister Simplice fell on her knees near the table. The door opened. Javert entered. The whispers of many men and the protestations of the portress were audible in the corridor. The nun did not raise her eyes. She was praying. The candle was on the chimney-piece, but gave very little light. Javert caught sight of the nun and halted in amazement. It will be remembered that the fundamental point in Javert, his element, the very air he breathed, was veneration for all authority. This was impregnable, and admitted of neither objection nor restriction. In his eyes, of course, the ecclesiastical authority was the chief of all. He was religious, superficial and correct on this point as on all others. In his eyes, a priest was a mind who never makes a mistake. A nun was a creature who never sins. They were souls walled in from this world, with a single door which never opened except to allow the truth to pass through. On perceiving the sister, his first movement was to retire. But there was also another duty which bound him and impelled him imperiously in the opposite direction. His second movement was to remain, and to venture on at least one question. This was Sister Simplice, who had never told a lie in her life. Javert knew it, and held her in special veneration in consequence. "Sister," said he, "are you alone in this room?" A terrible moment ensued, during which the poor portress felt as though she should faint. The sister raised her eyes and answered, "Yes." "Then," resumed Javert, "you will excuse me if I persist. It is my duty. You have not seen a certain person, a man, this evening. He has escaped. We are in search of him, that Jean Valjean. You have not seen him?" The sister replied, "No." She lied. She had lied twice in succession, one after the other, without hesitation, promptly, as a person does when sacrificing herself. "Pardon me," said Javert, and he retired with a deep bow. "O sainted maid, you left this world many years ago. You have rejoined your sisters, the virgins, and your brothers, the angels, in the light. May this lie be counted to your credit in paradise." The sister's affirmation was for Javert so decisive a thing that he did not even observe the singularity of that candle which had but just been extinguished, and which was still smoking on the table. An hour later, a man, marching amid trees and mists, was rapidly departing from Montreuil-sur-Mer in the direction of Paris. That man was Jean Valjean. It has been established by the testimony of 2 or 3 carters who met him, that he was carrying a bundle, that he was dressed in a blouse. Where had he obtained that blouse? No one ever found out, but an aged workman had died in the infirmary of the factory a few days before, leaving behind him nothing but his blouse. Perhaps that was the one. One last word about Fantine. We all have a mother, the earth. Fantine was given back to that mother. The curé thought that he was doing right, and perhaps he really was, in reserving as much money as possible from what Jean Valjean had left for the poor. Who was concerned, after all? A convict and a woman of the town. That is why he had a very simple funeral for Fantine, and reduced it to that strictly necessary form known as the pauper's grave. So Fantine was buried in the free corner of the cemetery, which belongs to anybody and everybody, and where the poor are lost. Fortunately, God knows where to find the soul again. Fantine was laid in the shade, among the first bones that came to hand. She was subjected to the promiscuousness of ashes. She was thrown into the public grave. Her grave resembled her bed. End of Volume 1. End of Book 8. And end of Chapter 5.